Good afternoon. I'm Erin McGurl, Executive Director of the Bibliographical Society of America, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to this discussion with the editors of Pbsa, Drs Werner and Erickson. Before we begin, I'll remind you that this event is being recorded, and by participating, you do agree to abide by the BSA Events Code of Conduct. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of today's program, James Gray Bookseller, and also Patrick Olson Rare Books. Patrick sponsored Bibliography Week captioning for the whole week, so a big special thank you to Patrick for supporting accessibility in today's program. This event is being captioned by a closed captioner in English, and I'm also going to put a link in the chat in a moment so that you can access the Spanish auto translation of captions in today's session in a separate window. So last but not least, we'll conclude with a question and answer period. To submit a question to today's speakers, please enter it into the Q&A box. All attendees can see, comment on, and upvote questions. And we ask that you do upvote questions that are of interest to you so that we can prioritize the events from the questions that are of greatest interest to this audience. We encourage you to engage in conversation using Zoom's chat feature during today's talk. However, if you submit a question through the chat, I will ask you to re-enter it into the Q&A box. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah and Jesse. I'm going to turn my video off for now, and I will return for the Q&A to moderate the discussion. Thanks, Sarah and Jesse.
Thank you, Erin, for the nice introduction and for setting this up. Jesse and I thought that we would start off with just each of us sort of introducing ourselves and talking a little bit about the journal, and then hopefully we'll be able to answer lots of fruitful questions for you. So I'm Sarah Werner. I live outside of Washington, D.C. My background, well, my first background was as a Shakespeare and performance scholar. I wrote about modern performances of Shakespeare and turned into kind of a book history person, and then turned into a really kind of a bibliography person, and ended up writing a book about early printing presses and early printed books. So the hand press period is really where I spend most of my time. But I'm also really invested in bibliography becoming an accessible way of working with books. This is something that Jesse and I really sort of share. Jesse and I share a lot in common, but this is something we definitely both sense that bibliography should not be a closed off world. We want it to be a world that presents itself as accessible and that offers tools that we can use to study lots of different types of texts from lots of different types of cultures and groups. So that's the sort of the quick version of who I am. Maybe I'll let Jesse can introduce himself, and then we can share a little bit about our vision for the journal, and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm Drs Erickson, and I'm just wrapping up my first week as the new Astor Curator of Printed Books and Bindings here at the Morgan Library Museum. And it's been quite an inspirational first week indeed. My background is in ethnobibliography, which I first applied to the study of African-American print culture. And then I branched more recently into Victorian studies as a collector of the Victorian period author Ouida. And I've been applying ethnobibliography to the study of the transnational publishing history of that author. So that's pretty much my background. Yeah, I mean, if you like, I can jump into how I see our vision for the journal moving forward, and then if you have some thoughts to follow up on, that would be great. So So I think Sarah and I, as she had mentioned before, we really share a vision whereby we can maintain, I think, the tradition of intellectualism, and there's a dedication to rigorous bibliographical scholarship that's part of the journal's brand, right? But we want to do that while maintaining while embracing really a fresh perspective that really adds, integrates more diverse voices to the journal in terms of its contributors and the range of articles that we're really looking to publish. And I mean, obviously, we're really interested in tapping into the existing scholarship coming out of Latin American bibliography and Black bibliography and print culture, and the bibliographical study of books from like Africa, Eastern, Western, and South Asia, and Australasia. And to me, it's because there's so much to learn from the world's bibliographical traditions, like the various aspects where these diverse histories and the cultures of the book intersect. And I think the really important cultural distinctions that make each unique, it's all really vital at this point in the scholarly discourse. It's difficult to think about the history of paper, history of bindings, printing technology, and everything that bibliographical scholarship entails as limited to one particular region of the world, siloed off as if it's sort of hermetically sealed from developments in different parts of the globe. So at least to me, I think learning about the rich diversity of bibliography, both within and outside of our own cultural experience, it really helps us to have a better sense of who we all are, right? In terms of our shared global book culture. So we're definitely interested in reaching out to different communities of scholarship on that front. And I think that we're also hoping that we're going to get submissions that embrace perspectives of inclusivity and critically minded approaches to the field. We're open to articles that aim to reconceptualize the boundaries of the field in interesting ways that may be challenging to previous systems based on exclusion or marginalization or cultural othering. And we're hoping to see more articles that confront histories of white supremacy, histories of sexism, heteronormativity, ableism, that sort of thing, and the impact that they've had on the book trade and books in general. And I think we discussed this, but we're also looking for survey pieces that address the current state of the field and that sort of thing. And of course, we want to see, we really want to see some new takes on method. I think digital projects is something that we're interested in being integrated into submissions, whether that means more reviews of digital projects or perhaps, giving interactive supplementary materials a digital footprint. We've been in talks about that. So yeah, I mean, that's basically kind of the vision that we've been talking about. Oh, I think one more thing I should add though is that keeping in mind the larger goals of this agenda and expanding or I should say, helping the journal to be a part of the expanded field of bibliographical scholarship. I think there's still so much we can explore on the traditional front, like in terms of more traditional submissions. When you're dealing with bibliography, there's so much we can cover on a granular level and on a grand scale. So, even generations of scholars, it seems, have yet to exhaust the range and the depth of questions that can be addressed within the bibliographical, scope of it and its intellectual purview. So, yeah.
Maybe I will talk a little bit now about sort of some of the practicalities, like what happens when you decide you have a piece that you might like to submit to Pbsa. And we can sort of go through that, and we can also talk about, give you a little bit of a preview of what's in the pipeline and what's going to be coming out this year. There's some really great work coming. But first, so say imagine for a moment that you are a scholar of bibliographical studies and you have a piece that you think might be of interest to Pbsa's audience. The first thing that I think we would say to you is, yes, if you think Pbsa might be a home for this piece, we want to see it. Don't necessarily, I mean, it has to be about some aspect of bibliography because it's the publications of the Bibliographical Society of America. But Jesse and I have a broad sense of what might or might not fit. So if you think it fits, send it in. When you go to the journal website, either on Chicago's site or through Bsa's site, you can find a link to the Manuscript Submission platform that we use. We use Editorial Manager, which a lot of journals do, and you should rest assured that if you run into problems using that, you can contact us and we can help you talk through it. But basically what happens, you submit the journal, we get notified, take a look at the manuscript first, primarily just to see, is this a fit for the journal? Sometimes there are submissions that are like, this is really about economics. It's not really about books. But most of the pieces that come across the transom are in fact within the field that we want to be publishing. And so we read it through and choose some peer reviews that we think will give us insight into the strengths of the submission. So this is pretty standard for most journals. Send it out to a couple of reviewers. It can take some time now in what is still the middle of a pandemic to find reviewers who have the time to do that. So I feel like it's helpful for all of us at this stage at the beginning of 2022, just remember that everybody's a little bit overloaded. And so we want to find good readers for submissions. And sometimes that means it takes a little bit of time to find the good reader who has the time to dedicate to your submission. So then the readers send us back a couple of reports. Jesse and I look at the reports. Sometimes the reports say, woo, accept. That's rare. Almost hardly any journal gets those sorts of immediate accept. The reports might say things like, this is great, but it still needs a little bit of tweaking. This has a lot of potential, but there's still some pieces here that need to be sent back for revisions. We can't accept it at this time. And occasionally we do get readers whose reports say, this is not a fit for the journal. It's going to take a lot of work to get it through, or they have sort of other thoughts. So Jesse and I sort of compile their recommendations to us and compare it with our own senses of, yes, we agree, this matches our sense of what this article is. Ideally, if it's an accept, we write back to the author and say, woo, accept. Here are some changes that you might want to consider. If it's a revision, we'll send you the reader's reports along with sometimes some extra suggestions and say, like, if you want to do the work to revise it, we want to see that revision. And we do try to not do idle revise and resubmits. Some journals have a hard time saying no, so they'll just make everything a revise and resubmit. And when we say revise and resubmit, we really mean, yeah, we want to see it again. Like, trust us, like, we think there's something interesting here, but it's in your hands and you have to decide if our vision for what this article could be matches your vision of what this article could be. And then once it's accepted, then you get into the queue for articles to be published. At this moment in the journal, if something were to be accepted today, it probably won't show up in print until 2023. We have 4 issues a year. The December issue tends to be full, ideally, of the keynote speaker and the new scholars papers. So hopefully the exciting work that we'll be able to share on Friday will appear in at the end of the year in the journal, if that works out. So submissions come in, we don't have a lot of room. It's not a long backlog, but there is a little bit of time in that. And in that period of time, that's when you get to work on copy editing, going through, not just making sure that it conforms to the Chicago Manual of Style, which Hopefully it will before it gets into our hands, but also little tweaks like this would be nice if it would be helpful if you contextualized this paper a little bit. So maybe you need to flesh out the introduction. So things like that aren't sort of like reasons to reject an article, just like, let's make this the best it can be before it shows up in print. And then it shows up in print and you get some contributors' copies and we're all really excited about it. There's more sort of like complicated things that have to do with how images and permissions. If you want to have images in your journal, you need to have permissions to use them. They need to be, if they're not public domain, you need to have a letter of permission from wherever you got the image from, those sorts of things. So we're happy to answer questions about should you have that. But I just wanted to sort of like give you a sense of like, this is what it's like to publish in the journal. You're working closely with Jesse and I for the articles and bibliographical notes. Oh, and I haven't mentioned book reviews. We have books. So we also publish book reviews. And I am just about to drop into the chat. That's the current list of books that we have that we are looking for reviewers. Megan Brown handles the book reviews. So she is her contact information will be in there. If you see a book that looks like it's something that you will be able to review for us, definitely get in touch and let us know. If you have books that you think should be reviewed in the journal and they're not on that list, let us know. It's possible that there already have been assigned, have been out. It's also possible that somehow it slipped past our attention. Book reviews are such an important service to the field. They highlight important work that's coming out. They can help readers understand whether or not this is the right book for them to read. And we also want to start seeing more, Jesse mentioned digital projects, also reviews of digital projects. There was one, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, Heather Froelich did one for early English books online. There are lots of digital projects out there that are bibliographical that could be reviewed as if it was a book review. I'm going to pause for a second to see if Jesse has anything to add to that process stuff. I feel like I probably could be missing some things.
Actually, I was just thinking how comprehensive you were and thorough in your description of the process, and very helpful in sort of adding some of the nuances in terms of where we're at. So yeah, I think you pretty much covered all the bases.
Do you want to talk? Questions are starting to come in, which is great. Do you want to give a little bit of sense of like what's coming up in the next couple of issues, Jesse, and then we can start thinking about questions? Because there's great stuff happening. And right. I also just want to point out, Jesse will repeat this too, but I just really want to give credit to David Gantz, who has been the editor of the journal up until now. I think David was editor for about 9 years. And so the work that we are publishing, most of the articles that we are publishing this year came across the transom under David's charge, and it's great stuff. So I'm really grateful to David for all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're looking forward to, some exciting articles to come out. Derek Spires' keynote is coming out. On liberation bibliography is coming out.
March.
This question actually brings up another subject that's related to what's coming down the pike. Are we announcing that?
Well, I mean, I just sort of wanted to give a sense of to get people excited, because I will say that I have been working on copy editing the March issue, so it's super fresh in my mind. It's like one of the things that I keep pumping up, like, hey, did you know that Derek Spires' keynote is going to be in the March issue? It was amazing watching it, and now we have a written record. And I just paused because I was like, oh yeah, we could have a whole conversation about version control and bibliography and right and sort of like the talk and recording of
Right.
it. But so in the March issue, we'll get to read Derek Spire's piece on liberation bibliography. There's an article by Liza Blake on Margaret Cavendish and the bindings of her books that really does a lot to help us understand how she saw her relationship between her books and the universities and the incredible degrees in which she went to have control and disseminate her work. So that one is really exciting. And then there's a third piece by Hyo-sing Cho on Korean.
Chosun, yeah.
Yeah, on Chosun letter writing. It's really about what Cho calls spiral letters. And it's again, sort of like how did this happen? It's really interesting look at some material texts.
Yeah, it gets into the epistolary culture and the ways that it challenges sort of the more conventional ways that we think about layout, right? Yeah, it's going to be a really thought-provoking piece to, and I think they're going to line up quite well with each other in that issue.
Yeah, it's sort of coincidence. It's basically we tend to publish pieces just sort of like in the order that they come in. Right, so we don't, and depending on how long and how short they are, how many we can fit into one issue, and it just sort of happened to be like these were the 3 that fit into this issue, and they are very different from each other, but really enlightening in ways that work together into something that I'm really excited about. And then, do you want to share about the June issue, and then that starts to get into the question we have in the Q&A.
Right. So yeah, the June issue is a special issue that will be publishing pieces from the Black Bibliography Project. And we're super excited about that. We're going to feature, our guest editors, Jacqueline Goldsby and Meredith McGill, who, really have been spearheading the Black Bibliography Project for a number of years now. And so a lot of the scholarship that has come out of that will be featured in this special issue. And we're just couldn't be more excited about that.
Yeah, it will be, it's got 4 articles on it. It has a bibliographical note that it's sort of like, it's not just a note, it's a really in-depth look at some early work. It has what Jackie and Meredith described as a bibliography of bibliographies, which is going to be a super useful tool, I think, for people immersed in the field and also people who are newer to the field, as a way of sort of like, how do you find work? How do you begin to enter into this field? And a lot of great book reviews that Jackie and Meredith had done. So it'll be a whole issue. And if you are a member of the society, you will get that mailed to you and you will get that in hand. I mean, I really think that this is going to be a special issue that is going to be worth having on your shelf to hang on and refer to in the future. I don't want to sort of like spoil who the authors are. Well, sort of all of that will be announced, but it's great work. And it is getting Pbsa in the mail, like a hard copy of Pbsa that you can hold in your hands. And if you're like me, sometimes snuggle up in front of a fireplace and read. I'm sure I'm not the only person who does that. Is one of the really nice benefits of being a member. So Meredith and Jackie have done great work in this issue, and we're super excited to be able to do that. Oh, my cat's meowing at me. Sorry about that. So do we want to? I'm sorry. My cat's meowing. Jesse, do you want to start looking at the first? We have a question from Jean Marie Musto. Aaron, do you want to take care of helping?
Yeah, I'm ready to moderate. So
all right, thank you.
Yeah, I will just start at the beginning and remind you all to please take a look at the questions we're getting in. If any of them are particularly interesting to you, click that thumbs up button and let us know. So Jean Marie Musto asks, you are embracing quite a broad vision. Do you foresee perhaps, sorry, let me start over. Do you see rotating special sections devoted to particular aspects of your vision. I realize you're just getting started, but I'm thinking that some sort of thematic framework known to readers and writers might be helpful. Which I guess is another way of saying, are you thinking that more special issues might be coming down the pike? Can people approach you to propose a special issue?
So I think
that's actually been happening. And it's something certainly that I'm interested in. I think it's a good, and if not, special issues, per se, having some of that work at least filter through the journal.
We can also do, like, if a cluster of articles would be different than a whole special issue. If you're gonna do a special issue, that's gonna include book reviews, let me tell you, because there are so many important books that need to be reviewed. But if you have a group of articles, if you have we are open to different sorts of article formats too. So if it's sort of like a roundtable conversation around any of these sorts of issues, that could be something that could be adapted for the journal. There are lots of possibilities. We are still figuring out, as you alluded to, and we are still just stepping into this and figuring out the places and how we want to do it. But we are definitely interested in different possibilities for including that and just constantly having that in our forefront.
Yeah, and I think of also, there's been examples where authors were interested in having articles talk to each other or be in conversation with each other. So that's another possible avenue to kind of group relevant scholarship together in interesting ways.
So a question now from Nina Schneider. Sarah mentioned this in your explanation, but I'm wondering if you could expand upon the role of peer reviewers when deciding the relevance of submissions. So if editors agree that a submission is relevant, would a reviewer reject it because of the writing or because they disagree that it belongs in Pbsa?
That's an excellent question,
That's an informed question.
Yes, it's very informed, and it's something that I feel like all journal editors struggle with to some degree. I do think that we have not yet encountered moments where we strongly disagree with both of the readers that we've sent it out to. So I will say, that doesn't necessarily happen a ton. I do imagine that it's possible that readers of an article could have reviewers of an article could have a different sense of how expansive Pbsa is. And in that case, Jesse and I are the editors. If we think it fits in Pbsa, we think it fits in Pbsa. And then the question of if it's a strong article, like if the problem that a reader has with it is that they think this is a bibliography, if Jesse and I think it's bibliography, that's what counts. Is that right, Jesse? Do you?
Yeah. We ultimately, we have the final say on that. But in my experience, we've tended to really rely upon the expertise of our reviewers, and we really want to make sure that we're finding a good match for each article. And sometimes it's outside of our own specific sort of specializations. So in those cases, it's really important that we get substantive reader reports coming back to us. And it can be sort of a long, kind of complicated process that involves numerous back and forth sort of conversations that we'll have between contributors, readers, and the editors. And so I don't think there's a really an easy answer for that. It's sort of on a case by case basis.
Yeah, but I do. Jesse and I are the ultimate decision makers. Oh my God, was that what Bush said? we are the ultimate decision makers.
Yeah, I mean, it falls
And
to
we take
us.
responsibility for that.
Yeah, so if we look at all the reports and review the article a number of times, and then we decide, no, this does actually fit within what we are trying to publish, then that we'll go with that.
So there's a good follow-up question to this in here from Mark Danley. And it's a question about the amount of time between the receipt of the draft and your decision of editors as to whether or not to find reviewers, referees, and send it out. So in other words, how long can someone expect to hear from you to say, okay, we are proceeding with peer review and we'll let you know when we hear back from your reviewers?
Do you mind if I jump in on that one?
Yeah, go.
Okay, so since we stepped in July, it's taken a little bit longer than both of us would like. And my goal is to sort of streamline this process so that it goes by faster. But it, as of now, it's been, let me see, approximate time between. It's varied, right? Because there's a lot of moving parts. It depends, I mean, we generally set 30 days from the time in which we have, sort of secured our peer reviewers and they agree to review the piece. But sometimes, they'll ask for extensions. Sometimes they're coming in late. We do our best to get everything done in a timely manner, but it's been up to, there are some cases when it's been more than a couple of months. But yeah, my goal, at least moving forward, is to cut that time down so that readers can get that decision back as soon as we can get it to them.
Jesse, do you know, because I can't remember off the top of my head, when so to answer part of Mark's question, sometimes the delay is when we know pretty immediately that it should get sent out to readers, and then the slow part is like finding a reader to agree. And also sometimes even before that, as Jesse was saying, like if it's something that comes in that's outside of both his and my expertise, it takes a little bit to do some research to find. We want to make sure we find the right readers for pieces. But Jesse, do you know when we do get the manuscript into the reader's hands, do we have a notification at that point that goes to the author of the submitted manuscript that says?
Oh, that's something I don't know.
I don't think we do, and I'm wondering if maybe that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't think it's set up, but we could do that. That would be, I would imagine, especially
right
when you're waiting, just to have a sense of like, yep, it's happening, it's in hands.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is, because based off the correspondence that I've received before, I don't think that part is
we might be
there's a notification in the system for that. There is a notification for when revised, a decision is made on a revise on resubmit, for instance, and it goes out to the readers. But yeah, I think that would be helpful for contributors to know that.
Yeah, I'll jot that down. We can figure out a process to do that.
There's a question now from Lisa Mardoyan. Hi, Lisa. Lisa is one of our new scholars. If you haven't registered for the New Scholars Program and annual meeting or watched her talk on YouTube yet, you should. I'll put a link in the chat when I finish reading her question. So Sarah and Jesse, would you be open to adding an interview section, or would you accept an interview for publication, is maybe a more general way of saying it. She's asking specifically because there is so much intersecting right now between bibliographical scholarship and artificial intelligence, which is mostly handled by physicists and or mathematicians. She's thinking of, in lieu of an article, if a Q&A session would be beneficial to shed light and give more detailed information on this phenomenon of more diverse fields coming together in bibliography. So it's kind of two questions, like, what do you think about an interview as a type of article for publication? And do studies around AI fall into bibliography within your view of the discipline in the field?
So that's so interesting. I will say I don't know, Jesse and I haven't talked about this, so you'll see what happens live as we work through this. Generally, I don't love reading interviews as like a scholarly thing. I tend to find them not enlightening. However, I am now thinking, because of your question, Liza, how, when you're talking about fields that don't have a lot of shared practitioners, but might have a lot of shared interest, like AI, and I do think that there are ways in which AI and bibliography can be of interest to each other, that maybe there are ways in which that people could write an article that was kind of a sort of introduction to a field, introduction to how AI meets bibliography, as opposed to a lot of people, I think when you think of scholarly article, you're like, it has discovered something and it's trying to prove something. And we definitely agree, because we've talked about this before, that we would like to imagine what scholarship is beyond just an act of discovering something, which is sort of a fraught way to think about it. What do you think, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question that I think gets at the heart of, some of what we were thinking about in terms of having a more expansive view of bibliographical scholarship. And, I can't speak to, how it relates to artificial intelligence per se, but I'm thinking of other fields where something like integrating aspects of perhaps oral history methodology might be relevant to, or critical fabulations or things like that might be relevant to getting at communities of the book trade, right, that are not traditionally captured in conventional ways, right, that fall outside of the scope of the sort of conventional mechanisms of bibliographical production, right? And so, this might be relevant in things like, zine culture, LGBTQ zine culture, sort of street lit, things that may not have the sort of archival representation necessary for kind of the conventional forms of bibliographical scholarship that we're more familiar with. And in those cases, I could see something like oral history or an interview with practitioners in that area, people that were involved in the production of of bibliographical objects within those communities, being relevant to addressing those sort of areas of research. So I think it's a possibility, but no, I agree with you, Sarah, in that just trying to publish a straight up Q&A between somebody that is relevant to the field in some way may not be the best fit, depending on what the work is trying to do.
Yeah, and I am really aware of sort of like the difficulties of bringing one approach into a different field, right? So that's really tricky, and that is not necessarily met best by a sort of traditional scholarly article. But I think there may be other ways in which you could approach that. And that's an instance, I mean, we didn't say this before, but both of us are open to authors querying us, saying, I have this idea, I'm not sure how to best get it to work for Pbsa, what's your thoughts? So like, I'm not saying that Jesse and I will read like drafts before you submit it, but as a conversation to sort of say like, I really want to explore AI and bibliography, and how do I do that in a way that's going to work for the journal and work for our audience?
I mean, if I may, I'll just add something that Lisa has put in the Q&A about groups she's in contact with that are working on manuscripts and paleography, and AI is definitely, Lisa Fagan Davis's talk a few years ago really touched a lot on technology and AI that's being used to detect the hands of different scribes. And one approach perhaps might be to submit a review and publish a review of some of those kinds of resources that addresses shortcomings that really have to do with a lack of awareness of a broader bibliographical type ways of knowing and practice.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah.
thinking about how we approach different, I'm not an editor, but just seeing what she said, it just struck me right away as like reviewing those projects is a great way to
Yep.
sort of
Mhm.
bring people in conversation, and then even inviting a response from.
And it could be a, we have not very often had a chance to publish review essay, sort of like the big review essay. So not a review of a book, but a review of like, here's what's happening with this group of books talking about graphical design, and then to use that as an occasion to think through. So a review essay in which multiple projects, that could be an option too, to sort of bring in those other fields into conversations with us.
So
Really,
I'll
really
ask the
thinking
last
about that.
question that is here in the Q&A. If anyone has another question for Sarah and Jesse, please feel free to enter it in. We have time to take more than this question. She said, Marta Werner says that she and her colleagues at Textual Cultures are interested in attracting submissions to their journal that open the field and that speak directly to concerns with diversity and inclusion. Would you be willing to talk about how you encourage scholars working in new ways / with new perspectives and methodologies to send materials and to join the larger community? I think that's a great question.
It's so
Like
good.
we're all figuring it out, right?
Yeah, it's like that's a great question, or a really hard one. Jesse, you answer it.
Yeah. Well,
Don't let me do it.
I mean, you really, I think it really takes a lot of time and effort and dedicated labor in terms of immersing, oneself in the, existing scholarly communities that have been out there for generations, right? And really sort of outlining ways in which, the work that's already out there sort of intersects with the work that has been coming out of a journal like Pbsa, for generations, and trying to sort of craft and forge those aha moments where folks can see that there's a natural fit there. There's a place for a conversation to be had, right? And because I think it's a little bit more, it's a heavier lift to try to jump into a community of scholarship that you have zero connection to or zero background in, and just say, oh, you need to publish with us. It just doesn't seem like that approach will bear much fruit. So it's just a matter of being patient. And even with our work with the journal, I don't expect a lot of these changes to happen overnight. Of course, I mean, it's very fortunate that I think that the Black Bibliography Project is doing a special issue with us. But honestly, that was in the works before we even stepped in. So but the Black Bibliography Project is something that not only was I aware of, but involved with. And so I know a lot of the people that that are involved with that project, and it's a really important project. So it's just not coming out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just something that it's gonna take time and effort and labor. There's no way around it.
And one of the other things that Jesse and I have been thinking about in terms of doing that kind of building that you're talking about, Marta, is creating an advisory board. I mean, you know this already. Creating an advisory board that includes people who are not just sort of like the traditional editors or the traditional bibliographers, but that have ties to and are from the communities and from the areas of scholarship that you want to bring into the journal. And that way they're bringing with them the knowledge that they can say to us, hey, you think this piece about early Japanese books is amazing, but actually this is like a completely boring approach, and what you need to be doing is reading these scholars. And that's, I mean, that's the beauty of a group, right? Is that sometimes a group brain can be so much more enlightening. And the other, I mean, I think the other piece of it is also thinking about, which is something that we try really hard in addition to, is about choosing who you review. So when somebody does submit something to the journal, being very careful about who it gets sent out to. And you should know that Jesse and I are super aware of that there are, from any journal in any field, lots of stories, and there's been some prominent ones recently that we don't really need to talk about now, about people submitting articles or clusters that have to do with, you know, race and Anglo-Saxon culture. And it gets sent to a reviewer who's just like, race doesn't have anything to do with Anglo-Saxon culture, therefore this doesn't belong in Anglo-Saxon culture studies journal. I hope that's not a real journal, because I made that up. And you want to be able, though it happens a lot, particularly from, especially around studies and scholars of areas that have not been included traditionally in our work. And so keeping that in the mind when you're selecting reviewers and reminding readers that this is what we're looking for in your responses to this is another way. And I think it helps flush out readers too, because, you know, word spreads. Like if you submit to a journal and you get back a review that says, well, this isn't appropriate for our journal because she's talking about feminist bibliography and that's not even a thing, I will tell inevitably, right? Like we have our circles, you talk to friends, but if you send it to a place and you get back, and I would get back a letter saying, this isn't a good fit for us, but we were really excited about the ideas and, you know, we hope this finds a home somewhere else. I'd be like, well, I would think well of that journal and it'd spread the word that would be a place. It's hard work though. Can
I add a little something to that, which I think is really important with respect to the changes that the council has made over the past several years. And part of that is that, you know, I am now a full-time executive director. And I think that BSA has been able to make a lot of progress because there has been a conscious choice to invest in dedicated staff to help keep things going, and build relationships and help to build trust with communities that have had reasons to mistrust the organization, or maybe prominent people in the field perhaps. And I don't know if that's necessarily been true with BSA, but, you know, a big part of my role with the society, and I say this to anyone who is coming to us today thinking about their organization, you know, if you don't have staff, and I realize not every organization can have staff, really giving yourself as much time and as much sort of gentleness in your approach with working with the volunteers, and really biting off only what you can chew at a time, and really thinking carefully about listening to the people that you are reaching out to, and trying to welcome in, and seeing what they need before you try and say, well, we need you actually to make our organization, you know, help our organization achieve our goals. It's more, you know, what are your goals? Is there any way that we can help you and collaborate in achieving those goals? And I think that any organization that's going to be successful in any kind of equity oriented work really needs to underscoring really what Jesse said, that it takes time. Trust building is so important. And if you don't have dedicated staff, I'm not saying it's impossible, but give yourself even more time and really be gentle with yourselves and others in the way that you approach that work. And also really think about, you know, there are parts and, you know, this is stuff that came, you know, when Jesse and Sarah came on, that while we are pushing the boundaries, we are also publishing, and you are committed to publishing the bibliographical scholarship that has sustained the journal and the field for so many years. It's not as if we are abandoning the, Anglo-American bibliography. Far from it. You're going to continue to see Anglo-American bibliography in the journal. It's just going to be balanced with material, articles and book reviews that address other cultural material texts from other cultures.
It's not either or, it's both and.
Exactly. It's
just like both and.
So I'm going to ask now a question from Dan Slive. This is going to be our last question. So in addition to formal articles and book reviews, are there shorter features you may be considering? For example, in the past, smaller pieces included something along the lines of notes and queries or other updates from the field, broadly expanded. So that I think would include bibliographical notes that, for people who don't know, are short pieces where someone says, I've worked with this thing and I researched it, and now we know that it was printed by so-and-so, and here's how we know.
So we haven't mentioned the bibliographical notes. So I'm really glad for that prompt, because it is such a useful contribution to the field, those moments. And I think there might be some in the pipeline eventually. Those sorts of things are great. I think that we are both open to, one of the things that Jesse and I talked about when we were imagining, like, did we even want to apply to become the editors of the journal? I wasn't aware. So both of us come from, Jesse had a faculty position at Delaware, but we were both coming out of sort of like library land type backgrounds, in which we were both really aware that there are lots of people who do bibliographical work who do not have the time given to them, or is not part of their sort of working conditions, that they need to be creating research products. And because of that, if you're a full-time librarian and that sort of research isn't part of your job, it can be really hard to create a full-length scholarly article of 8,000 words that does whatever. And so we are really interested in shorter pieces that are honestly sometimes a little bit easier to absorb than a full-length piece. That's also a gift to readers, those sorts of pieces. And so definitely bibliographical notes. And I think we would be open to other ideas. I think we would love to hear sort of like a general, not like I want to submit this, but like, wouldn't it be great if the journal did this? We would love to hear your thoughts about that. And specifically, if anyone has short pieces that they want to know, like, does this fit in? Plug it to us. Maybe it does.
Yeah, no, I agree fully with that. And I think, I've been impressed with some of the short pieces, some of the bibliographical notes that have come in, but I think it's important to stress that just because it's short doesn't mean that it can't be substantive, or doesn't mean that it can't move the scholarship forward, or doesn't mean that it can be thought-provoking in really sort of compelling ways. And that's really what we're looking for with the bibliographical notes. And I think our readers have been really keen on that, because they'll get assigned readers as well, and they've been really keen on identifying those notes that are moving the conversation forward in some significant way. And so I think that those are great. It helps to sort of bring texture, I think, to the journal, right? So that readers of the journal can digest sometimes really long pieces that are really text heavy, or some that have a lot of figures and illustrations. And then you have, those are sort of punctuated by these, shorter pieces that that can just really hit in a really different way. So yeah, we're interested in all that.
Basically, the answer to almost the subtext, almost everything Jesse and I have been saying is like, do you have an idea for us? Come talk to us. There's almost nothing that we would say no to straight off the bat, except for like, it has nothing to do with books at all. then we would probably say no. But if it's connected in some way with bibliography, we're open. You're muted, Erin.
Thank you. You'd think I'd learn by now, but so we have one more question in the Q&A, and I'll just condense it just because I think that this is important for our readers. Can you tell us about the peer review process and if it's blind, double blind? That is problematic in Excel because sometimes you know exactly who commented, even if it is blind or double blind, you know whose paper you're reading because you saw it at a conference. Just in 4 minutes, can you address that last question? Thanks.
So we do double blind, like a lot of journals, and we have Megan Brown, who is both the book reviews editor and the managing editor, doing a lot in a small amount of time. Megan makes sure that before the articles get sent to readers, it has been stripped of identifying marks. So, but as you point out in your question, Mark, it's really double blind is sometimes truly double blind. But it's a relatively small world that we all work in. So sometimes, I mean, I read for other journals too, and sometimes I get an article and I think to myself, I think I might know who this is. And that's sort of the life of scholarly publishing. We hope that that reviewers will recuse themselves if they know that they have a conflict. Like if they start reading a piece and they're like, oh yeah, I was in this, I recognize the seminar paper because I was in a seminar with this person and I've seen it. We want them to tell us because it might still work, in which case we'd have to sort of go back and forth and talk about it. The other thing I'll add, which is a sort of principle that I have come to as a reader, that we do not ask our reviewers to do. I'm being really clear about this. This is something that I personally do. And it's something that I would like for lots of scholars to consider. When I provide a review for a submission, I always tell the editor that I'm willing to be identified. And I do that in part because I want the accountability. It can be very easy when you're anonymous to slap something off quickly or rudely even, and you're never going to pay back for it. But if I'm writing a review, I want the author to benefit from it. I want to engage with that in a responsible manner. And so, it's something to think about for other people out there. It's not a policy that Jesse and I are going to change. We're not going to suddenly go to open no blind. I don't know what that would call it. We are not making that. We are not making that change. But I think there's something to be said for self-identifying if the editor wants to then pass that information on.
Yeah.
Jesse, do you want to add to that before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, that was very well said, and I agree with everything wholeheartedly. I'll just say that I'm new to this position, and this is my first time in an editorial role of this nature. So I'm still sort of learning the nuances of how best to shield that double blind process, because there are certain indicators that can come out in the reports, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that a report that is intended to be blind stays blind. So
yeah, that way too. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for making time to talk with potential writers in Pbsa today. I don't know what they're doing above me. Hopefully you didn't just hear that very loud crash in my office. But again, yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you again to our sponsors, James Gray Bookseller and Patrick Olson. We could not make these programs possible without you. And if anyone missed today's session, you can let them know that a YouTube video will be made available after Bibliography Week in early February. So thanks again. And Yeah, anything from you two, Sarah and Jesse, before we go?
I was just going to say, you can find our email addresses on BSA's site for Pbsa, and really seriously email us if you have specific questions, general questions, possibilities. We're eager to hear from you.
Yeah, and
Right.
thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate
Yeah,
your
thank you all
attendance
so
and-
much.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bye, everyone. Take
Bye.
care.